Every day, people make hundreds of small financial decisions, purchasing a cup of coffee, upgrading a streaming subscription, or adding an extra item to a shopping cart. Individually, these choices appear inconsequential, yet when observed over months or years, patterns emerge that can subtly, almost imperceptibly, erode personal wealth. This is not a story about reckless spending or sudden financial collapse. Rather, it is an exploration of the quiet, accumulative forces that shape financial outcomes and how seemingly trivial expenditures can produce disproportionate effects over time. The central question guiding this investigation is deceptively simple. How can minor, routine expenses, often dismissed as insignificant, exert a meaningful influence on long-term financial stability? While people tend to focus on major transactions, buying a house, paying off a car, or investing a salary, research in behavioral economics and psychology suggests that it is the aggregation of small, habitual choices that frequently determines financial trajectories. These expenditures are rarely scrutinized or consciously evaluated. They occupy a liminal space between necessity and indulgence, existing in the background of daily life, yet their cumulative impact is measurable. Historically, the notion that minor expenditures accumulate into substantial financial consequences has been observed in various contexts. Early economic theorists in the 18th and 19th centuries, including Adam Smith and later Francis Edgeworth, noted that wealth accumulation depended not only on income or investment, but also on the careful management of routine outflows. Smith, in his writings, emphasized the importance of frugality and disciplined allocation of resources, while Edgeworth explored the probabilistic nature of repeated small choices in wealth accumulation. Though these observations were framed within broader economic theory, they presaged modern behavioral findings that repetitive, low-stakes decisions can produce outcomes rivaling those of large, discrete choices. To understand this phenomenon, it is essential to clarify what is meant by small expenses. These are expenditures that, in isolation, do not provoke conscious deliberation. They often include discretionary purchases, microtransactions, subscription renewals, or daily consumables. The defining characteristic is not merely their monetary value, but their frequency and the lack of active decision-making surrounding them. Conceptually, they occupy what behavioral economists call low-attention spending, expenditures that require minimal cognitive effort yet recur consistently. Over time, this low-attention spending can compound, creating a substantial drag on financial resources despite the absence of overtly irresponsible behavior. Behavioral psychology provides further insight into why these expenses are overlooked. Humans are prone to present bias, the tendency to prioritize immediate gratification over long-term outcomes. This cognitive bias encourages attention to immediate rewards, however minor, while discounting future consequences. A small daily indulgence provides an immediate sensory or emotional return, while its long-term financial impact remains abstract and largely invisible. Compounding this effect is the phenomenon of mental accounting, a concept popularized by Richard Thaler, which suggests that individuals categorize money into separate, psychologically distinct accounts. Money allocated to discretionary or fun categories is mentally insulated from broader considerations of overall financial health. In practice, this can lead to the paradoxical situation where people perceive themselves as financially prudent, while routinely engaging in expenditures that erode cumulative wealth. Empirical studies reinforce the significance of these patterns. Research on consumer behavior consistently finds that microtransactions and low-value, high-frequency purchases can amount to significant annual outlays. For example, a study examining habitual spending on small daily items, including coffee, snacks, or app purchases, estimated that individuals could be spending several $1,000s annually without conscious awareness of the total. Historical analogs exist as well. In post-World War II Europe, families navigating scarce resources often adopted strict budgeting for essentials but overlooked small, frequent indulgences such as minor treats or social gifts, which quietly consumed a disproportionate share of available funds. In these documented cases, even minor habitual expenditures could influence long-term savings and resilience, demonstrating that the pattern is neither exclusively modern nor solely theoretical. This topic intersects with broader economic principles, particularly the idea of cumulative opportunity cost. Every dollar spent on a discretionary routine item represents a decision not to allocate that resource toward other potential uses, savings, debt reduction, or long-term investment. While the magnitude of any single transaction may be negligible, the repetition of such choices creates a cumulative effect whose significance grows geometrically rather than linearly. Economists describe this as a form of compounding in reverse. Just as investments grow exponentially when nurtured, unexamined small expenditures can compound in their capacity to diminish net wealth. Conceptually, this reframing challenges the common perception that financial outcomes are determined predominantly by income or extraordinary events. Instead, it underscores the importance of routine behaviors, which often operate below conscious awareness yet produce tangible effects. Beyond the mathematical and behavioral dimensions, there is a psychological and cultural context to consider. Societies have long conditioned individuals to normalize minor habitual spending. Marketing strategies, subscription models, and urban convenience economies all create environments where small expenditures are encouraged, trivialized, and rendered almost invisible. Historical examples, such as the rise of consumer credit in the early 20th century United States, illustrate how cultural shifts can institutionalize low-attention spending. Credit cards, installment plans, and subscription-based services reduce the immediate pain of spending, effectively masking the gradual erosion of personal resources. Understanding small expenses, therefore, requires not only a quantitative lens, but also an appreciation of the societal frameworks that normalize and even incentivize them. Importantly, the focus here is not moralistic judgment. The inquiry is analytical. What mechanisms allow minor, routine spending to produce measurable consequences over time? And how does human psychology interact with economic structures to amplify this effect? By examining historical, behavioral, and structural dimensions simultaneously, patterns emerge that illuminate the subtle interplay between individual choices and systemic influences. This approach allows for a richer understanding of wealth dynamics, one that does not rely on extreme behavior or dramatic financial shocks, but instead reveals the quiet, accumulative processes shaping financial outcomes. As we prepare to explore these dynamics in greater detail, it is helpful to frame the investigation around several guiding lines of inquiry. How does habitual low-attention spending interact with cognitive biases like present bias and mental accounting? What historical evidence exists to suggest that small, repeated expenditures have materially influenced household or personal wealth? In what ways do modern economic systems facilitate or obscure the impact of these choices? And finally, how can the aggregation of minor decisions over years and decades create consequences comparable to those of large, one-time financial shocks? With this foundation established, the next step is to examine these patterns analytically. By exploring concrete examples, empirical studies, and historical case studies, it becomes possible to trace the pathways through which seemingly trivial expenditures accumulate into significant financial effects. This investigation will reveal the mechanisms of compounding in reverse, the role of human psychology in routine spending, and the subtle, often overlooked ways in which everyday decisions shape long-term financial resilience. It is at this point, having set the conceptual and historical groundwork, that the deeper analysis begins, allowing us to move beyond abstract definitions into the evidence and examples that bring this phenomenon into clear focus. To understand the magnitude of small, habitual expenditures, it is useful to examine the mathematics underlying cumulative impact. Consider a simple recurring expense. Spending $5 daily on a convenience item, such as coffee or a snack. On the surface, $5 is insignificant, almost negligible. Yet, when multiplied across days, months, and years, the sum becomes substantial. Over the course of a year, that $5 daily expenditure amounts to roughly $1,825. Extend the calculation over a decade, and the total surpasses $18,000, not accounting for inflation or lost opportunity costs of alternative uses. This example demonstrates the principle of low-value, high-frequency spending. Small numerical quantities repeated consistently yield significant aggregates. The effect is compounded when multiple categories of small spending intersect, such as subscriptions, minor retail purchases, and casual dining. Each layer contributes to an unseen but measurable erosion of resources. Empirical research confirms this effect in real-world behavior. A 2019 study examining personal expenditure patterns in the United States found that adults under the age of 40 spent an average of $250 per month on discretionary micro-purchases, defined as transactions under $10 each. Over 10 years, this equated to over $30,000 in cumulative spending. Participants were largely unaware of these totals, frequently underestimating their aggregate outflows by 20 to 30%. These findings illustrate the role of perception in financial behavior. Individuals process small expenditures as isolated events, rather than as components of a larger financial pattern. The mental separation between minor spending and overall wealth contributes to an illusion of financial control, while resources are gradually redirected away from long-term objectives. Historical examples also illuminate the phenomenon. In interwar Europe, households attempting to recover from wartime scarcity were meticulous about budgeting essentials such as bread, coal, or rent. Yet minor indulgences, candies, newspapers, or small household goods regularly exceeded expectations. Researchers examining the period in Germany and Austria observed that families who maintain strict discipline on major expenditures often experience slow financial erosion due to these cumulative minor purchases. These expenditures were psychologically comforting, providing a sense of normalcy or reward amid broader scarcity, yet the overall effect on wealth accumulation was measurable and, in some cases, significant. A second dimension is the interaction between these expenditures and human cognitive biases. Present bias, for instance, predisposes individuals to overweight immediate benefits and underweight future consequences. A small purchase today provides instant gratification, a taste, a moment of convenience, or a symbolic reward, while the cumulative financial consequences remain abstract and temporally distant. Similarly, mental accounting encourages individuals to segregate money into categories, often labeling discretionary spending as fun or treats, effectively isolating it from the household budget as a whole. The psychological insulation of these funds creates a situation in which minor expenditures are perceived as costless, even when aggregated totals are substantial. Behavioral economists argue that this mental framing is not merely a quirk, but a systematic factor shaping long-term financial outcomes. The effects of small expenses are further amplified by structural economic mechanisms. Modern consumer culture, particularly in developed economies, is designed to encourage recurrent low-value transactions. Subscription-based models, automatic renewals, microtransactions in digital platforms, and ubiquitous point-of-sale temptations create an environment in which minor expenditures are both frequent and cognitively trivial. For instance, subscription services for entertainment or software are often billed in amounts that are too small to provoke reconsideration yet recur monthly. Collectively, these systems institutionalize habitual, low-attention spending, converting minor decisions into a consistent drain on resources. In essence, the structure of the economic environment interacts with human cognitive tendencies to reinforce these patterns. Case studies provide additional insight into the consequences of habitual small spending. Consider households tracked by longitudinal studies in the United Kingdom during the early 2000s. Families with relatively modest incomes were observed to spend significant portions of discretionary income on daily consumables, takeaway meals, coffee, or minor entertainment. Over the study period, families that actively monitored and reduced these expenditures demonstrated measurable improvements in savings rates, emergency fund accumulation, and debt reduction. The comparison highlights a principle. While major financial decisions such as housing, automobiles, or investment are often perceived as primary determinants of wealth, it is the consistent management of minor, repetitive expenditures that frequently differentiates those who accumulate resources from those who do not. A particularly illustrative example arises from the evolution of personal finance software and banking analytics. Modern tools allow users to track micro-level spending patterns with unprecedented precision. Analyses reveal that small recurring expenses, often categorized under ambiguous labels such as entertainment or miscellaneous, account for disproportionately high percentages of total discretionary spending. Users who adjust or eliminate even a subset of these micro-purchases often experience notable increases in overall financial stability. This evidence demonstrates the principle that minor habitual behaviors, when aggregated and monitored, have predictive and explanatory power regarding financial outcomes, validating earlier theoretical assertions made by both historical economists and contemporary behavioral researchers. Cultural factors further shape the dynamics of small spending. Societies emphasizing consumer convenience and instant gratification often normalize minor expenditures, embedding them in routines and social expectations. The emergence of loyalty programs, promotional incentives, and digitally mediated purchasing reinforces the perception that these expenditures are routine or low risk. In contrast, societies with more restrained consumer cultures or periods marked by scarcity illustrate the conscious awareness of minor expenditures as cumulative factors influencing overall household stability. Comparative analyses of these contexts reveal that behavioral and structural influences are intertwined, suggesting that micro-spending patterns cannot be fully understood in isolation from broader economic and cultural systems. In addition to historical and structural perspectives, small expenditures can be analyzed through the lens of opportunity cost. Each minor purchase represents a decision not to allocate the same resource to other uses, saving, debt repayment, or investment in longer-term personal or human capital. Over time, the aggregate opportunity cost may rival or exceed the nominal dollar amount spent, particularly when compounded over years. Behavioral research indicates that individuals often underestimate this cost due to cognitive biases, perceiving small expenditures as inconsequential in isolation, while failing to account for their cumulative effect on long-term financial potential. The convergence of psychological, historical, and structural factors frames a more nuanced understanding of the phenomenon. Minor habitual expenditures are neither inherently irresponsible nor necessarily excessive. Instead, their significance emerges from the interplay between frequency, perception, cumulative impact, and economic context. By examining these dynamics systematically, it becomes possible to trace pathways through which routine behaviors, often invisible in daily life, produce measurable effects on personal wealth over time. The accumulation of seemingly trivial expenditures is not a sudden or dramatic event, but a gradual process whose effects, while subtle, are real and persistent. Having established the mechanisms and context, the investigation now moves to illustrative examples of how these expenditures manifest in modern life, historical parallels, and quantifiable outcomes. By analyzing these patterns, we gain insight into the behavioral logic underpinning habitual spending and its cumulative consequences. This sets the stage for synthesizing the evidence into broader implications for understanding the psychology of money and long-term financial trajectories. The patterns revealed by examining small, habitual expenditures suggest a broader insight into human financial behavior. Wealth is not only determined by income or extraordinary financial decisions, but by the cumulative effect of routine choices made over time. Historical evidence, behavioral research, and structural analyses converge to demonstrate that minor spending decisions, repeated consistently, can erode financial resilience, reshape opportunity costs, and subtly redirect resources away from long-term goals. What appears trivial on a daily basis gains significance only when considered in aggregate, revealing the latent power of seemingly insignificant behaviors in shaping outcomes over months and years. This perspective invites reflection on the role of awareness in financial decision-making. In documented studies, individuals who tracked small expenditures, categorizing, reviewing, and contextualizing them within larger financial patterns, often demonstrated improved savings rates and reduced debt accumulation. The act of monitoring, rather than moral judgment, provides insight into behavioral tendencies and reveals the hidden contours of financial habits. Awareness creates a feedback loop. As individuals recognize the cumulative impact of minor spending, they adjust decisions in ways that align with broader financial priorities, illustrating the subtle but tangible effect of conscious observation on economic behavior. Historical examples underscore the long-term implications. Families navigating post-war scarcity in Europe or periods of hyperinflation in South America during the 20th century often faced the necessity of deliberate expenditure management. While large, obvious purchases were carefully planned, the overlooked daily expenditures could quietly consume limited resources, sometimes determining whether a household maintained stability or experienced chronic financial strain. These historical parallels highlight the universality of the phenomenon. Across eras and cultures, the human tendency to underestimate the cumulative effect of small, routine financial behaviors is evident. The consistency of these patterns reinforces the analytical importance of minor expenditures in the study of personal finance psychology. In addition, the relationship between minor spending and opportunity cost illustrates the interconnectedness of financial choices. Money allocated to repeated low-value transactions represents not just a depletion of resources, but a decision to forego alternative uses of those funds, whether for long-term saving, debt reduction, or investment in human capital such as education or skill development. From a probabilistic perspective, the aggregate effect of these opportunity costs can be substantial. While individual small expenditures are unlikely to produce immediate catastrophic outcomes, their cumulative opportunity cost often rivals or exceeds the monetary outlay itself, demonstrating the subtle but pervasive influence of habitual spending patterns on broader financial potential. Behavioral economics provides further clarity regarding the mechanisms behind this process. Present bias, mental accounting, and automaticity interact with social and cultural norms to reinforce habitual low-value spending. Individuals routinely underestimate the total cost of daily expenditures because the transactions are cognitively trivial, temporally immediate, and socially normalized. Marketing practices, subscription services, and digital conveniences amplify these tendencies by minimizing perceived cost and integrating spending into automated routines. Consequently, minor expenditures operate within a complex ecosystem of psychological, social, and structural influences, producing an impact far greater than the nominal dollar value would suggest. The implications extend beyond individual financial outcomes. Patterns of small, habitual expenditures illuminate broader dynamics in economic behavior, including the interplay between perception, habit formation, and resource allocation. Researchers have noted that financial literacy alone is insufficient to account for long-term outcomes. Even individuals with knowledge of budgeting principles and investment strategies are subject to the cumulative effects of repeated low-attention spending. This suggests that effective analysis of personal financial behavior must incorporate both cognitive and structural factors, recognizing the multifaceted pathways through which minor actions influence larger systems of wealth accumulation and resource management. At the societal level, these patterns offer insight into why certain economic policies or interventions may succeed or fail. Initiatives aimed at improving household savings or financial resilience often focus on income supplementation or debt relief. However, the persistence of micro-level spending patterns illustrates that structural or psychological factors may constrain the effectiveness of such interventions. Recognizing the cumulative impact of small expenditures highlights the need for approaches that integrate behavioral understanding with economic policy, acknowledging that wealth outcomes are as much a product of repeated everyday decisions as they are of large-scale economic events. Reflecting on these dynamics emphasizes a subtle but important principle. Financial outcomes are emergent properties of repeated individual behaviors interacting with structural and cultural contexts. Minor expenditures, often perceived as inconsequential, can accumulate to produce significant long-term consequences. These outcomes are not deterministic. Rather, they operate probabilistically, shaping likely trajectories without guaranteeing specific results. By analyzing historical cases, behavioral studies, and contemporary examples, it becomes clear that understanding financial behavior requires attention to both the visible and invisible forces that govern daily decisions, including those that may appear trivial in isolation. Ultimately, the study of small expenditures offers a lens into the broader psychology of money. It demonstrates how habitual decisions, cognitive biases, and structural incentives converge to shape financial trajectories. While no single daily purchase may determine an individual's financial fate, the aggregation of minor choices over time produces patterns that are analytically significant and practically consequential. The subtle interplay between attention, habit, and cumulative effect reveals the mechanisms through which ordinary behavior influences extraordinary outcomes, providing a nuanced understanding of wealth accumulation and depletion. As we consider these insights, it becomes evident that the quiet erosion of resources through routine spending is not a phenomenon confined to any single culture, period, or income level. Rather, it is a persistent feature of human financial behavior, observable across historical eras, economic systems, and social contexts. The lessons extend beyond accounting or budgeting. They offer a perspective on how human cognition, habit, and environment coalesce to shape material outcomes. In observing these patterns, one gains a deeper appreciation for the subtle forces that influence wealth, illuminating the often overlooked mechanisms through which financial life unfolds over time. If you found this exploration insightful, consider subscribing for more deep dives into money, behavior, and economic patterns.